What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, two-time welterweight world champion, superstar boxer, Showtime Shawn Porter, who is a surefire future Hall of Famer, who just recently retired after his November 20th showdown with undefeated three-division world champion, former junior welterweight undisputed world champion, currently the WBO welterweight world champion, who is widely considered by many to be the #1 best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, and Terence "Bud" Crawford. Terence "Bud" Crawford, he beat Shawn Porter via 10th round stoppage. He dropped Shawn Porter twice in the 10th round after Terence Crawford's team informed him that he was down on the scorecards, and Terence Crawford was baffled to hear that he was down on the scorecards, and so Terence Crawford in the 10th round, he turned it up. He dropped Shawn Porter twice in the 10th round, and ultimately Shawn Porter's father, trainer, and manager, Kenny Porter, he threw in the white towel. He saw enough, okay? With that said, that saw Terence Crawford bolster his resume to 38 wins, no losses, no draws, 29 big wins by way of knockout. He is 34 years of age, 5'8", with a 74-inch arm reach. That left Shawn Porter 31 wins, 4 losses, 1 draw, 17 wins by way of knockout. At 34 years of age, 5'7", with a 69-inch arm reach. Shawn Porter, he called it a career immediately following his stoppage loss to Terence "Bud" Crawford. Now, what's interesting here is that Shawn Porter, I was just sent a clip that I never heard of Shawn Porter on his Porterweight podcast, and he was asked, who's a bigger puncher? Now, the biggest sport in the biggest rivalry and the biggest fight in the sport of boxing, Terence Crawford makes up for 50% of. The other 50% is a former rival foe of Shawn Porter as well, an undefeated unified WBC IBF welterweight world champion superstar boxer, Errol Spence Jr., who is widely considered by many to be top 3 best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. Errol Spence Jr., 27 wins, no losses, no draws, 21 wins by way of knockout. Errol Spence Jr. is 31 years of age, 5'9.5", with a 72-inch arm reach. So Errol Spence is 1.5 inches taller than Terence Crawford, and he has a 2-inch arm reach disadvantage to Terence Crawford. Or if you want to say Terence Crawford has a 2-inch arm reach advantage over Errol Spence. Errol Spence is 3 years younger than Terence Crawford. That makes for the biggest fight in the sport of boxing. So Shawn Porter, he was asked about who hits the hardest. Now, obviously, the triangle theory is irrelevant in the sport of boxing, but there is nuances. There is little things that, people would love to hear, when you compare the two, okay? And so Terence Crawford, he just fought Shawn Porter, and Shawn Porter, he had a massive unification pay-per-view showdown with Errol Spence September of 2019, in which it was a hard-fought fight, just like his fight with Terence Crawford. Shawn Porter was dropped in the 11th round, and Errol Spence clearly won the 12th round. That seemed to be the difference in the fight, okay? And so with that said, it was a nip and tuck fight with Shawn Porter and Terence Crawford. As I just stated to you, Errol Spence got a split decision victory. Terence Crawford got a TKO victory, but it was a nip and tuck fight. As I just explained to you, in between the 9th and going into the 10th round, Terence Crawford team was telling Terence Crawford he was down on the scorecards, okay? So that's how nip and tuck close fight this was for Terence Crawford and Shawn Porter. Now, personally, I thought that Terence Crawford was winning the fight by 2 rounds, and I thought that Errol Spence was up 2 rounds in his fight with Shawn Porter. So both fights was definitely the very, very nip and tuck fights, okay? And so Errol Spence is a southpaw. Terence Crawford is a fighter that switches from orthodox to southpaw, fluidly, but he's predominantly becoming a southpaw, okay? More so in the orthodox stance, you're seeing a lot of fighters have a lot of success when Terence Crawford is in the orthodox stance. You saw former IBF welterweight world champion, British superstar boxer, Special K. Kell Brook, November 14th of 2020. He had a lot of success against Terence Crawford. He won the first few rounds against Terence Crawford when Terence Crawford attempted to fight in the orthodox stance. he had trouble with Kell Brook's jab, okay? You saw when he was in the orthodox stance against Shawn Porter, he had trouble with Shawn Porter, okay? It seems like he's becoming predominantly a southpaw now. And you have a lot of fighters, they're saying Terence Crawford is not a switch fighter. He just uses the switch to try to confuse you, but he don't have success anymore out of the orthodox stance. He's predominantly a southpaw fighter, okay? You have rising welterweight superstar title contender Jaron Boots Ennis, who switches southpaw and orthodox very fluidly, who's very big, 5'10", with a 74-inch arm reach at 24 years of age, 28 wins, no loss, no draw, 26 wins by way of knockout. He switches, and he and his team, they believe that Terence Crawford is not very successful out of the orthodox stance. He's more so a southpaw, and when he's in the southpaw stance, he doesn't even use his right hand very well, okay? He paws with his right hand. So, there's a lot to be desired when it comes to Errol Spence, who's a natural big southpaw with a beautiful jab, and very disciplined and very technically skilled. Terence Crawford is very versatile, in my opinion. I think he does have success in the orthodox stance. I think he does have success in the southpaw stance. I think it's who's in the ring with against, okay? And so with that said, Shawn Porter was asked who hits the hardest, okay? Because that's another question. Terence Crawford has stopped his last, I believe, 8 opponents, if I'm not mistaken. Terence Crawford, dating back to his fight with Thomas Delorme, okay? He stopped Thomas Delorme back in 2015. He stopped Derry Jean back in 2015. Hank Lundy in 2016. And then he got a unanimous decision over Victor Postol, who he dropped twice in that fight, but he didn't get the stoppage. Then he stopped John Molina. He stopped Felix Diaz. He stopped Julio Julius Indongo. Okay, then he stopped Jeff Horn, Jose Benavidez, Amir Khan, Igor Kavalauskas, Kell Brook, and now Shawn Porter. Okay, so you date back to the Victor Postol, that fight, that stopped it. So you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. His last 9 opponents, he stopped. Okay, Errol Spence was seen as a guy who was stopping everybody, who was big, physically strong, technically sound, and he was brutally stopping people, okay? But Errol Spence, in his last few fights, he hasn't gotten stoppages, okay? Errol Spence, he's getting, he's showing that he has the ability to outbox and getting unanimous decisions over his last few opponents as he stepped up in level of competition. Now, when you look at the level of competition, when you step up in level of competition, stoppages sometimes come to a halt. The last stoppage he had was Carlos Ocampo back in 2018. But also, too, he stopped Kell Brook, Lamont Peterson, and Leonard Bundle, Chris Algieri. He was on a major knockout streak, okay, going into his fight with Mikey Garcia, okay. He had knocked out his last 10 opponents going into the fight with Mikey Garcia, and he outboxed Mikey Garcia, and then he had a classic with Shawn Porter, and he outboxed Danny Garcia. So with that said, but you got to take into factor in as well as the level of opponents changes, and Terence Crawford, the level of opponent he facing Shawn Porter, he didn't knock out Shawn Porter. He got a stoppage victory over Shawn Porter. He didn't knock out, Amir Khan. He got a stoppage victory over Amir Khan as well. So, but the level of opponents are those opponents that Errol Spence would stop. He didn't stop Shawn Porter. He dropped Shawn Porter in the 11th round, but he didn't stop him. So there's questions to be desired. But when it comes to Shawn Porter, he feels like that Errol Spence is the bigger puncher. He says that Errol Spence is the bigger, stronger fighter, and he hits harder than Terence Crawford. He says what Terence Crawford is very versatile, very tricky. He's a Rubik's Cube, right? You have to figure out Terence Crawford. He has weird angles, extremely long arms to be 5'8" with a 74-inch arm reach. Jaron Ennis has 74-inch arm reach, but he's 5'10". You take that into consideration that Jamel and Jamal Charlo, who are natural 154 junior middleweight and middleweight fighters, their reach is a 74. So he has extremely long arms, okay, to be a welterweight and only 5'8". Errol Spence has extremely long arms, but he's 5'9.5". Okay, like I said, Jaron Boots Ennis has extremely long arms, but he's 5'10". Okay, they're extremely tall guys. He's 2 inches shorter than most of these guys. the Charlos of 6 feet tall. Errol Spence is 5'9.5", and Boots is 5'10". Okay, so he has extremely long arms. So Shawn Porter, he stated that's what Terence Crawford is very tricky. He's like no other fighter you ever face. But when it comes down to just physical, sheer strength and brute power and just physicality, he said the edge has to go to Errol Spence Jr. Errol Spence is a bigger, stronger guy. Now, again, like I said, Terence Crawford gets stoppage victories, and that could attest to what Shawn Porter is saying about him being very tricky. You having to figure him out, and you having to, be mindful of him fighting orthodox, fighting southpaw, being able to throw hooks. He has a jab. He throws these awkward angles, right? Extremely long arms, the hooks on the inside. So, he's very, very versatile. So Shawn Porter, he feels like Errol Spence is the bigger, stronger guy. He didn't truly attest to who he think would win the fight, but it sounded like he was leaning towards Terence Crawford winning the fight. But in the same token, he sounded like he wouldn't be surprised if Errol Spence win the fight, right? Also, too, you got to factor in that Shawn Porter stated that he didn't, in training camp, give it his 100% all, okay, as he did with Errol Spence. He was having issues with his father, Kenny Porter, and essentially he was going against the grain, right? So, but I don't like to factor that in because that's taken away from Terence Crawford's victory over Shawn Porter. You know what I mean? So this is interesting. Makes for the biggest fight in boxing. Now, we have to see what's next for Terence Crawford. We know what's next for Errol Spence. He's going to face Cuban star boxer, who's the WBA, World Boxing Association's welterweight world champion. And they're going to fight in March, so in a unification bout. And then that's the fight that everybody wants to see, Terence Crawford, Errol Spence. And we have to see Terence Crawford, again, he fought Shawn Porter November 20th. What's going to be next? Is he going to wait? All signs point to him waiting to Keith Thurman in July. That's the fight he's been targeting since he moved up to welterweight. Keith Thurman's former unified welterweight world champion. He's fighting in his comeback fight. The last time we saw him in the ring was July of 2019 as well, when he took on 8 division legendary iconic Filipino superstar boxer Manny "Pac-Man" Pacquiao and lost his WBA title. He already previously lost his WBC title due to inactivity. And so now Keith Thurman is coming back after a 2-year layoff. Again, he had a 2-year layoff leading into from 2017 to 2019. Now he's had a 2-year layoff from 2019 going into 2022. Okay. And he's going to fight Mario Barrios in February 5th to be exact. And he's looking to fight Terence Crawford in July. Terence Crawford, when he made his debut, he made it well known that his plans was to face off against Keith Thurman because he was the man to beat at the welterweight division. And he stated, to beat a man, you got to beat the man. So let's see how all this unfolds. But it's interesting to see that Shawn Porter says Errol Spence is naturally a bigger, stronger, physical guy, and he hits harder, okay? And he's more accurate with his punches. So will that be a factor against Terence Crawford? Or will Terence Crawford, who we know moved up from 130 to 147, it's not a surprise to hear Shawn Porter say that Errol Spence is bigger, stronger, and more physical and a harder puncher. But to many, it'll be a surprise because Terence Crawford's stoppages, he's on the range, stopping his last 9 opponents, and Errol Spence hasn't stopped his last 3 opponents. So we got to see how this unfolds. But that's all I got for y'all. Make sure you hit the like button. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue, Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button. Hit the bell icon to get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to New Media. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.
Oh, it is your boy Jada Kiss. Make sure you check out Blue Blood Sports TV. It's going down.